So here's something interesting. I want us to get one thing straight from the onset. When the news headlines scream that South Africans are spending 1 trillion rand on gambling, they are in fact incorrect. There's a massive misunderstanding that's happening here that's actually gone on to distort how we see the entire gambling industry. They aren't saints or anything of the sort, but the reporting on that 1 trillion rand number has got a lot of parliamentarians panicking, economists scratching their heads, and the general public, you guys, wondering if we've collectively lost our minds as a nation. Now, with all of that noise around the gambling industry, I believe that this video is really necessary for a little bit of context about the true scale of South Africa's gambling boom and a deeper understanding about why sports betting has become the fastest growing sector in our economy. On top of that, we're also going to examine whether we're witnessing economic opportunity or social disaster in the making. It's going to be important for us to dig into the real numbers behind the sensational headlines and also to explore how economic hardship is fueling gambling behavior. And then we're going to tackle the big question that everyone's avoiding. Is all of this sustainable, or are we headed for a social reckoning? Okay, first things first, that 1 trillion rand figure that everyone's throwing around, it's what I would call funny money. And frankly, the National Gambling Board shouldn't have released that number in the form that it did, because it's too big a number and it's also confusing to the average person about how it was calculated. When you understand that South Africa's entire economy sits at roughly 4.6 trillion rand, it becomes almost impossible for betting alone to represent 1.1 trillion rand in genuine economic activity. It should have been pretty simple for everybody to see, but we're here, I guess. But what you need to understand here is that this figure accounts for every single bet placed by every single punter, including all of the recycling that happens when somebody wins money and immediately bets it again. It's like counting the same 100 rand note 5 times as it passes through different hands in a single day. Technically accurate in terms of transactions, but misleading when trying to understand actual economic impact. Okay, so you're asking yourself, what is the real number that actually matters? Well, that's something called GGR, gross gambling revenue. That's all of the money generated by the industry through its operations, genuine operations. That number, gross gambling revenue, it hit 59.3 billion rand in the years 2023 into 2024. It's still a big number because when you put it in perspective, that's more money generated in the entire gambling industry than in the Stokvels industry in South Africa, an industry which generates around 50 billion rand annually. But don't get me wrong, these are really big numbers and they should be grabbing attention. Gambling is literally bigger than one of the most established informal collective savings economic sectors. Inkulu into gambling, guys, and we've got to understand that. But with all of that said, I want to know what's your take on how statistics can be misleading in any industry actually. Have you noticed other examples where big numbers don't actually tell the full story? Also, how do you feel about the gambling industry? Tell me just straight up. Let's have a conversation down below. The next thing that we need to look at is the sports betting explosion that's happening in South Africa. And when we take a macro view of what's driving this industry, the numbers start to tell a very interesting story. Overall, gambling revenues grew in South Africa by 25.7% year on year, which in any other context would be considerably explosive growth. But betting specifically, well, that increased by 51.2% relative to the previous years. Let me actually repeat that slowly. 51%. No other industry in South Africa is even remotely close to that kind of growth rate. We're talking about a subsector that's literally doubling in size every 2 years. At this pace, we're probably going to be looking at the entire industry reaching 100 billion rand in just a few years. When we actually zoom into sports betting even more, it now generates 60.5% of the entire industry's gross gambling revenue at 35.9 billion rand alone. I mean, that figure completely dwarfs traditional casinos, which currently bring in around 17 billion rand. But what's fascinating to note here is how this figure represents a fundamental shift in how South Africans now choose to gamble. We've, in essence, moved from the social experience of casinos to the convenience and accessibility of online platforms. Platforms in your phones, platforms that exist now in your homes. Then, when we look at the provincial breakdown of where this revenue is being generated, Western Cape comes first at 31.7% of GGR, followed by Gauteng at 22.1%, then you've got Mpumalanga at 21.9%. But there's something quite interesting that you need to understand here. Mpumalanga is eating Gauteng's lunch when it comes to gambling revenues, because when it comes to licensing of gambling companies, Mpumalanga moved faster when it came to online gambling operations around regulations and policy. Companies now followed that path of least resistance, and they went to Mpumalanga, and the tax revenues follow those companies. Also consider that the infrastructure that's driving this boom is our 4G and 5G networks in South Africa, where we've now got 70% in internet penetration. This was in 2020. Then, when you couple widespread connectivity with our genuine love for sports, you get the perfect storm for mobile betting adoption in this country. Actually, are you seeing more and more betting ads in your daily life? Have you ever placed a bet? Like, are you feeling like you're being over-marketed to by the gambling industry? Let us know down below and let's have a chat. When it comes to betting, we need to follow the money beyond just the betting numbers. Sports betting companies aren't just making money, they're spending it in ways that are reshaping our entire sports and our societal landscape. Betway is sponsoring the Premier Soccer League for 900 million rand over 3 years. That's 300 million rand per year flowing into our most popular sport, buying favors. Even our national football team is sponsored by 10Bet. This isn't just about marketing spend anymore. Betting companies are entrenching themselves into our sporting and social culture. It's happening, and I mean, which other major sport isn't sponsored by a betting company? The thing here is that sports betting companies understand that they're not just selling bets, they're buying authority and legitimacy in the sporting space. When you see something like an Eben Etzebeth's massive image dominating Cape Town International Airport, courtesy of Hollywoodbets, you're witnessing a strategic play for share of your mind that goes far beyond traditional advertising. But how I want you to see this next part when it comes to gambling is through the eyes of the economic desperation of South Africans. South Africa's unemployment rate sits at 32.1%, with youth unemployment at a staggering 45.5% for people aged between 15 and 34.
So from an employment perspective, with the decline in retail, there's already an evident impact. There's a lot of retail outlets that have since been closed by various operators. So we're already seeing that job loss, and we're seeing a lot of tech and AI taking over the space and automating processes for betting companies, which then means obviously more revenue and less overheads, right? So the job loss aspect of things is quite imminent. Does put the government and the regulators in a difficult position, because then they need to obviously have some sort of preservation of jobs, so they don't want to over-regulate the space. But at the same time, what could strike the balance could be a scrutiny on how to advertise, on not how to advertise as such, but a scrutiny on how to get your messaging out there as a betting house, because sometimes it is not that it's a lie, but to tell somebody that win X amount or instant this and instant that it's very coercive to a very gullible type of inexperienced punter. And if there's regulation and scrutiny that takes place with that type of messaging being put out, then we could see a more sustainable environment within the space.
When you're facing these kind of economic realities, the possibility of improving your financial situation through gambling becomes more than just about entertainment. It becomes a potential lifeline, a hustle. A study from Iceland after the 2008 financial crisis actually showed that financial distress during economic downturns makes the possibility of winning large jackpots with low initial stakes more enticing to people. That starts to sound familiar, right? We're essentially seeing this phenomenon play out in real time in our country. The overall numbers reveal something deeply troubling. 56% of surveyed punters claim that they gamble because they need the money. This isn't recreational gambling anymore. This is survival gambling. When 21% of gamblers are unemployed and 84% earn under 15,000 rand per month, we're looking at people using gambling as a financial strategy rather than entertainment.
So, I think we did touch on this earlier, that because people have progressed from seeing it as a form of entertainment to a form of lifestyle, Africa is not necessarily going in the right direction in terms of their perception and their approach towards gambling. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, especially the countries that are developing, that are introducing more tech. They're introducing more ways to have people wager and participate in secret.
Problem gambling prevalence has increased in South Africa fivefold to 31% between 2017 and 2023. Think about that progression. We've gone from gambling being a recreational activity to nearly 1 in 3 gamblers showing problematic behavior patterns. Then there's the tax situation that surrounds the industry. And you'll see something interesting at the dynamics that are at play here. The gambling industry paid 4.8 billion rand in taxes and levies during the 2023-2024 financial year, a 19.2% increase from previous years. But that's still relatively small considering the revenue that's being generated here. For context, the South African liquor industry pays significant taxes, with an estimated 97 billion rand in excise taxes alone for the years of 2022-2023, and a total economic contribution of over 226 billion rand, or 3% of GDP. All of these duties and taxes act as a primary source for government income, and they're a tool that is used to discourage alcohol consumption in the country. So just to sum this up, the alcohol industry pays approximately 43% of its revenue in taxes, and the gambling industry currently pays only 8.1%. Politically, things are set to change though, because there are now discussions about implementing a 15% withholding tax on gambling winnings that exceed 25,000. But the proposal has never actually been implemented due to the industry's opposition and administrative complexities. But it's now back on the table as National Treasury prepares its 2025-2026 budget. The argument for taxing individual winnings centers on curbing excessive gambling and funding addiction treatment programs. But there's a catch here. If you allow people to offset losses against the winnings for tax purposes, you might actually incentivize more gambling, not less. Then we also need to ask ourselves why they aren't adding gambling to the sin tax category like cigarettes and liquor and just tax the industry more. Am I missing something here? Currently, even casinos, they pay roughly 10% of their gross gambling revenue as taxes, while betting operators pay only 7%. This creates an uneven playing field that actually favors the fastest growing segment of the industry. Should individuals pay more on gambling winnings, or should the focus be on taxing the operators more heavily? What's your view on us using tax policy to curb behavior? Let's chat in the comments. Another thing that I've noticed that online betting platforms have cracked is the profitability in ways that make traditional casinos look almost antiquated. The business model isn't just about taking bets, it's about maximizing what's called the win margin. All of this encourages higher volume betting. Different gambling games have different average win margins, but online betting has among the best in the industry. This is largely thanks to the rise of parlay plays, where punters combine multiple wagers into a single bet. These parlays provide the illusion of higher payouts initially, but they actually deliver much higher win margins for operators. It's mathematical genius disguised as customer benefit. But let's get granular even more about how this actually works, because the mathematics here are rather brutal. To be fair, those astronomical 1.1 trillion rand wager figures aren't the net amounts being extracted from the economy, but it's what's being extracted from those who are still wagering. All gambling games have what's called a house edge. This is a percentage of bet value that the house will always win in the long run. It's actually baked into the game by design. And while there's randomness in any single session, this basic rule holds out over time. In the South African betting sector, the average house edge sits at about 5%, meaning the most likely outcome of betting 100 rand is losing 5 rand. For instance, Hollywoodbets told researchers that its online betting operations maintain a house edge of just 3% in line with international standards. Mathematically speaking, if average odds applied every time, a gambler would probably lose half of their money after just 23 bets. Think about that for a moment. 23 bets to lose half of your stake. The business model inherently hinges on people betting what's remaining of that 100 rand as many times as possible in the shortest amount of time. This is actually why game design becomes so crucial. It's all about speed and frequency. What makes this doubly troubling is that the survey data shows that more and more gamblers are now thinking of gambling as an income generation mechanic, not entertainment. An InfoQuest survey revealed that 53% of respondents either gambled because they need the extra money or because it's a big win and would probably change my family's life. Only 37% said that they were gambling with excess funds, meaning 63% are using money that they can't really spare.
So, I mean, everything has its way of being progressive, right? So I don't think any punter initially placed for some sort of a livelihood. There were various instances in their lives experiencing the gambling or betting culture that started to make them feel as though they could actually do this for a living. So the typical consumer, the typical punter would walk into a store, start once, twice, 3 times, and that initial winning, that beginner's luck is then what spurs on the idea that, oh, actually, maybe I could make money off this. And the genuine belief that the team that you support and you follow, you have a profound knowledge of following through and actually getting or making a profit out of those teams. And that's then the progressive nature, thinking that what was once just my entertainment and my previous discernment on wagering as a whole now turned into, hey, I can make money off this, because you have I'd say a false sense of belief that you could actually make a profit, and you really believe you follow this stuff statistically, when you probably don't. You're just a passionate supporter of specific sports and teams, and now you're overestimating your abilities to make money in the space, and as a result, you're finding people wagering excessively, and not only that, but chasing their losses once they've wagered. So that's the typical, the mind of a beginner to a moderate to a more advanced sort of punter. It's progressive, as I said in the beginning.
The impact is so significant that restaurant franchise group Famous Brands recently complained that online betting is eroding household disposable income to a point where it's threatening their entire sector. We're literally seeing gambling start to cannibalize other parts of our economy. When we take a closer look at traditional gambling operators, we see them scrambling to adapt though. For instance, Sun International has pushed into online, and this has boosted SunBet's revenues 4-fold to 733 million rand between 2021 and 2023. And this form of gambling now contributes 8% of their GGR. Soho Gaming is scaling up their online platforms, which generate 200 million rand annually, about 2% of their total revenue. But these casino operators are still playing catch up relative to the numbers against the pure online operators. The thing here is that we're at a crossroads that demands clear-eyed decision making. This industry generates meaningful economic activity, 59.3 billion rand in gross revenue, 4.8 billion rand in taxes, and over 35,000 people directly employed. But it's also creating social costs that we're only beginning to understand and interrogate. The most successful long-term approach would be to focus on recreational gambling rather than exploiting financial desperation. This will take a balance though. This means that better regulation, improved transparency, mandatory responsible gambling measures, and potentially restructuring how we tax both the operators and those that win need to happen. We need to acknowledge that sports betting isn't going anywhere. It's a global trend that South Africa is experiencing alongside technological advancement and economic hardship. The question isn't whether to allow this growth to happen, but how do we shape it in ways that create economic opportunity without completely destroying our social fabric. The conversation shouldn't be about whether South Africans are really spending 1 trillion rand on gambling, because they're not. It should be about whether we can build a gambling industry that serves recreational entertainment rather than preying on economically desperate people. And then the question will be whether we can do that before the social costs become too high to manage. What would responsible gambling look like to you? What type of policies do we need to put in place? I want us to finish this conversation down in the comments and start to chat there. Thank you for watching this video right up until this point. I hope it was just as interesting for you to watch as it was for us to make for you. Maybe check out one of these other videos and hopefully they'll be just as interesting as this one. Cheers.